Welcome to Tidbit Talkin. This is a series that consists of spewing out assorted thoughts which arose from somebody who thinks too much, taking in, and generally loving entertainment media by the boatload. These tidbits may be mini theories, observations, or simply jokes. Hopefully people will find them entertaining or at least interesting. And who knows, maybe they'll inspire others to look at what amuses them in different ways than before. Also bear in mind that everything blabbed about in these videos are from the perspective of somebody who's experienced every main story bit connected with whatever works currently being gone over. So spoilers are a definite. However, other works set in a shared continuity will typically solely be referenced in a way that only makes sense to anybody who's also fully experienced those ones up until their same time occurring points. Sort of a coded nod kind of deal. So, while things will be more fun for viewers who've indulged with an entire universe's works, nobody who has yet to do so will get non-experienced events spoiled. Now, with all of that out of the way, here we go. The Nuclear Man. Joe doesn't just want Cisco's help with investigating Nora's murder scene because of the guy's technical know-how. He also needs somebody else around who's capable of being cynical and objective. Cisco comes off as such a person in Detective West's eyes because of actions like inventing the cold gun in case Barry turned out to be psychotic. In fact, Joe may have secretly hoped convincing Cisco that Wells was suspicious could inspire the creation of another anti-speedster weapon. The anti-particle accelerator crowd was probably egged on by a blog post or some such created by an anonymous Hartley. Despite going to extreme truth-hiding lengths, such as murdering Bridge and destroying all of Joe's case information, Don never considers messing with anything at the Allen home, even though he spent 15 years being all two genius minds having, because nothing within him cares for past-related stuff. Thus, that camera mirror deal went undetected. On a somewhat related note, Don never put any surveillance in the old Allen home because he found Sherry off-putting. Barry could have actually ran and got a ghost pepper growing somewhere in order to make sure what he ate was authentic. The ghost pepper spiciness, along with every other taste-related sensation, shouldn't change for Barry despite how much his accelerated metabolism influences all other digestion process aspects. Even if food is breaking down more quickly in Barry's mouth due to how fast he generates saliva, the taste of his current meal would almost definitely linger within it. Thus, that ghost pepper's still a big deal for him. Dawn, of course, was more worried about Barry getting away from any lingering radiation quickly enough, rather than the actual explosion, when stating not even he can outrun a nuclear blast. Fallout. A Geiger counter could have been implemented in the suit's original design from back when it was being developed for firefighting use. After all, nuclear power-related stuff can involve huge blazes and even full-on explosions when things go awry. Eileen likely doesn't try to capture Firestorm until the halves are split up, because regardless of whether his actions have military higher-up approval or not, he probably doesn't have much of a budget to work with. Thus, he can't rely on ion grenades and needle-based anti-speedster kinetic weapons too much. Out of time. Barry may find added joy in bowling now because it's one of the only fun physical activities available to him that doesn't really change due to his super speed. Dawn most likely figured out he was in a timeline that's about to be deleted after Barry told him about seeing another Flash due to his own experience with traveling through history and utilizing speedster powers. This revelation is what leads to Dawn performing such ridiculously undeniable cover-blowing actions like leaving an empty wheelchair in front of Caitlin at Jitters, followed by nonchalantly killing Cisco, as he's just like, screw it, after realizing everything's reset bound. Don forces himself to be extremely habitual while playing the Wells part because introducing such repetitive actions into his fake life makes everything more just following a script like, thus rendering an Eobard eliminating identity crisis far more unlikely. Don likely couldn't kill pre-Flash Barry anytime other than that particular day when he was 11 because Nora and Henry's reactions to the event possess tremendous ripple effect potential. Henry-related consequences in particular would be crucial to Eobard's actions because the guy may have treated a descendant of his at one point. A father grieving his dead newborn or toddler would be incredibly likely to make a bad medical call after all. Caitlin, whose field of study is medicine, probably knew how to stop Martin's tidal wave right off the bat because her and Cisco discussed Barry Allen-related theoretical scenarios in their spare time other than ones that involved bugs getting swallowed. The two different time period originating self-fusing exhibited by speedsters in moments like this episode's end probably comes about as a result of said era-hopping physics-defying joggers wanting to be somewhere when else so strongly that they end up vibrating at their alternate history located counterparts' exact same frequency, which leads to instinctively confused Speed Force-induced person merging happening. Rogue time. Barry saying he was at the morgue yesterday probably didn't seem too suspicious to Thawne initially, because he's a CSI and thus sort of belongs there. Thawne likely thought the guy's mildly confused tone when stating so came about from at least one of two things. Option A. Barry was experiencing normal work-related fatigue of both the physical and mental varieties. Option B. He got hit in the head too often and or intensely while performing his routine supervillain fighting. Thawne probably doesn't want to know anything about the timeline Barry just erased, because at this point, he thinks only a fight between the Flash and Reverse Flash could result in his nemesis' powers getting pushed that far. Any discussion about said skirmish could of course result in Thawne accidentally revealing himself by a convenient outcome change happening that happens to eerily align with what he and Barry talked about. Perhaps before or after Vibrohan killing Cisco, Thawne stole another piece of tech or whatever for his plan, and he was worried about that chronology-cracking combat being tied to an event which would occur no matter what. Thus, a tiny tussle-tuck tell seemed likely if too much was known. Mr. Na-na-na-na-na, I stabbed your mom, would of course be planning to pilfer whatever he needs, whether or not Cisco was currently on the chopping block. So there's likely an assumption that the Flash accidentally time-traveled while intercepting him after an alarm went off. Or perhaps Yellow Suit Man was simply too worried that he may lack the self-restraint needed to hold back all his in-costume performed, timeline wrecker-related mockery. On a related note, Thawne acts extra true self-like this episode, to the point that he does something so blatantly logic-depleting anger-driven as killing Mason, because discovering that Barry has recently time-traveled makes him aware of his plan's completion drawing near. And that, of course, would make Wells imitating seem relatively unimportant. Snart and Rory likely could have built new cold and heat guns on their own, but procuring the parts would have been too difficult without Cisco's resources, since the companies they'd need to rob probably possess levels of security that render normal weaponry useless. The duo's lack of appearance and out of time may have been caused by them attempting such action and failing, as they of course never had a chance to kidnap Cisco due to his death and whatnot. Tricksters. Thawne is probably thinking about Nora's murder so much this episode because he's trying to figure out how the timeline can be manipulated in his favor if Barry does save her when prompted. It's possible that, since he's confined to a special isolated prison cell, James Jesse didn't learn of Henry's connection to CSI Barry Allen from another inmate, but rather by watching news reports about Nora's murder on TV after receiving his "Please stop killing guards" present.
That's not very sanitary.
Caitlin may have begun developing self-sanitizing medical equipment in a bid to restore Star Labs' battered reputation, much like what Cisco did when he formed firefighter fear-fending fabric that would later become the Flash suit. When Thawne describes phasing as vibrating at the natural frequency of air, he's likely just explaining it like that because coming up with an acceptable following thorough examination non-speech originating explanation for such a maneuver would simply be too difficult. After all, air doesn't go through everything, at least not so easily anyways. If it did, suffocation wouldn't be possible under many circumstances, like when one's getting smothered by a pillow. It would also be too easy under others, such as all situations involving bug sprays. What's probably really going on with phasing is that speedsters partially travel into the Speed Force and or another universe when doing so. Thawne wouldn't have taught Barry phasing unless the guy's life absolutely depended on it, because in addition to fears of being outed, his nemesis possessing a maneuver that's not so good for folks without perfectly consistent super speed could leave him far too vulnerable in many situations. There are plenty of good reasons that Thawne couldn't make the Flash happen earlier than 2014. Wells, inventing all the components needed for time sphere construction and other things like the tachyon device, could make his future far too different even if Flash's 2024 death remained exactly as before. If Barry gained powers before 25, the age when his brain should have finished developing, he may have turned out too different a person from what Thawne remembered. Such a scenario would of course make it much trickier for any behavior prediction centering planned proceedings to take place, which kinda ruins Eobard's whole shtick. Also, things would of course be much trickier if Barry wasn't established enough at CCPD to have a lab all his own. The number of meta-power development capable folks within Central City at earlier points in time was likely too low. Thus, if Barry developed speedster abilities, then he'd have no reason to lay heroic roots there instead of being globe-traveling super trouble-stopping guy. Even if Thawne helped Barry carry out at the very beginning of his career under such circumstances, ample trust likely wouldn't form without the two being around each other a lot. On the subject of those folks who can survive and thrive after what would normally cause a grave dive, the particle accelerator's exact activation time was likely calculated to ensure that no other speedsters were made aside from Barry. Even if Thawne's intended history could stay on course under such conditions, he couldn't risk a similarly powered ally being on the Flash's side, as his defeat would obviously come much easier then. Another villainous speedster showing up would be troublesome too, since in addition to the possibility of said person not caring about helping Thawne out with his time traveling, Barry might get killed too early. Thawne would also have to wait for a day that could produce the right weather conditions. On that note, a lightning storm, or at least the beginnings of one, is needed for everything to turn out all speedster creation filled, because a naturally occurring electricity source that can reach practically anywhere with windows and or outside heading doors must act as speed force bait. A human-manufactured source of high voltage, such as a malfunctioning outlet, wouldn't work too well because CCPD would be quick to fix it. Thawne's success in hiding Harrison Wells' body before any police ambulance show up could be a result of him still having accelerated thought processes despite losing all other Speed Force boosts. Also, given the kind of tech he was carrying while killing Harrison and Tess, he easily could have had some kind of machine on hand capable of camouflaging a corpse or whatever. The dead beloved scientist body may have only become visible years later because a general lack of maintenance plus weather and whatnot rendered said device useless. Thawne most likely decided to take over Wells' body because using his own and becoming some sort of mysterious advisor who sped things along would mess with the timeline far too much, as there'd be many more historical changes involved. Plus, such an action could have easily caught the attention of a future Flash from some timeline. Thawne was most likely planning to take Barry's place with his genetic structure stealing device at some point, before he decided on just killing the guy outright. He is a big fanboy after all. Perhaps Eobard told the Flash he was going to kill 11-year-old Barry in an attempt to set up a trap that would let some skin suit stealing take place. But then he got all moody and just settled on stabbing. All-star team-up. Thawne's probably happy about seeing the Atom because witnessing another hero mentioned by his ever glanced upon future newspaper article fills him with confidence that everything will go as planned. Cisco likely started to develop his vision powers during this episode because it's been a few weeks since Barry first time traveled, which means he's been spending most of his time around two people who've lived in at least one more reality iteration than everybody else. On that note, Mr. Ramon's first visions revolve around his own death because said reality immigrant's actions are what caused both it and the subsequent technical resurrection. Barry's suit's defibrillator, like an earlier mentioned tech bit, was likely meant for helping out those firefighters the thing was originally created for. Said device probably broke relatively easily because it was meant to be replaced and or upgraded often, so the Crimson Costumes users would always have the best equipment available. The thing may have even been a proof of concept just to show everyone what it could do, and Cisco would have made finishing touches based upon feedback given by firefighters. On a less altruism-related note, the suit defibrillator may have busted pretty much right away due to it possessing an intentionally effort-lacking design because contracts were in place between various fire departments and medical supply companies that prevented Star Labs from providing any input beyond basic design. One more thing about the suit's gadgets probably being meant for firefighters, it likely never became market-ready before Barry's Flash debut because there was too much testing to be done. Thawne probably isn't just being a smartass with his "do you have another one?" comment regarding the Tachyon prototype, nor is he merely looking to replace that first one. Christina developing another faster-than-light what-have-you device could potentially mean that Thawne would have to calculate more timeline manipulation factors, particularly if it was one of a different design. In addition to being inspired and intrigued by the Micro B drone, Ray may have decided upon going smaller with his Atom Suit's power source because waterproofing it might be easier that way. Who is Harrison Wells? Thawne starts slowly shedding the memories and emotions he stole along with Harrison Wells' body as his super speed having moments become more frequent. On top of being oh so victory close, just making him too giddy to keep up appearances, his real self aspects are taking charge because having an accelerated brain again makes pushing out lies much easier. Thawne probably isn't really all that worried about Everyman copying Barry's speed because it's not like the guy could figure out how to use speedster abilities efficiently instantaneously, especially with his not so learning focused personality. However, Barry figuring out good tricks for fighting other super fast people may have been troubling Eobard quite a bit. What's truly troubling Thawne is the possibility that Everyman could touch him and transform into a certain blonde man instead of Harrison Wells. If Cisco had completely performed his 3D model of Starlab scan before everybody suspected that Wells wasn't really himself, the guy could have just written his time vault off as just being a high-tech panic room or whatever. That would have been especially easy because the aforementioned test would have probably been performed in front of Thawne, giving everybody practically no time to dwell upon things before confronting him. Endings are a pain, but all of you are fantastic. See ya.